Has the time come to scrap welfare benefits and introduce a universal basic income? It's a radical idea which is gaining traction in Scotland and across the world. Under the scheme, every citizen would be given a regular payment regardless of whether or not they work. This month, Finland launched a 2-year trial in which people were paid €560 a month. Here's Scotland Tonight's Ewan Petrie.
The idea behind universal basic income is simple. Everyone would receive a regular, unconditional payment, regardless of whether they're in work or not. Supporters say it would help simplify the benefits system and provide people with greater security. Illness meant John Sullivan had to give up his job 2 years ago. Before receiving his employment and support allowance, he was living on £76 per week. He believes the welfare system, as it stands, is broken.
I'm not saying it doesn't do what it's meant to do for some people, but I would say for the majority of people, it doesn't do what it's meant to do. A universal basic income would make it possible to be able to live like most people do, you know, and get along and do things, you know, for a bit of enjoyment, a bit of fun, and have all the essentials taken care of.
The Fairer Fife Commission was set up to look at ways of tackling poverty and inequality here. One of its recommendations was to consider universal basic income. Now, councillors are looking into the feasibility of running a pilot scheme here, but there are a number of obstacles to overcome before it can be implemented.
It would probably entail some very specific changes that we would want to make to any group of people that are involved in a pilot in terms of any benefits, any tax that they're actually paying at the moment. Therefore, we're needing support from DWP, from the Majesty's Revenues and Customs, from the Scottish Revenue Service as well.
In Glasgow, councillors are also exploring the possibility of setting up a trial. At this stage, campaigners aren't putting a figure on what the payment should be, instead focusing on winning backing for the idea itself. A trial is already underway in Finland, with 2,000 people receiving just under £500 every month. Here in Scotland, it's an idea attracting support from across the political spectrum, but not everyone is convinced. Opponents see it as unaffordable and unlikely to incentivise people to find work.
To consider the case for a universal basic income, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Ben Simmons from the Citizens Basic Income Network Scotland, and in London is Ryan Shorthouse, Chief Executive of the independent think tank Bright Blue. Thank you both for joining us. Ben, why would Scotland benefit from a universal income?
Well, as we heard in the video, the modern welfare state doesn't achieve its stated objectives. While many of the policies are counterproductive, they trap people in financial dependency, they prevent people finding work, because as the nature of work changes to become more precarious, people are less able to take the risk of giving up the security of meagre benefits to take on the uncertainty of a 0-hours contract. In addition, it doesn't eliminate poverty in this country. Food banks are increasingly popular. And areas like Glasgow have enormous deprivation and vast differences, not just in quality of life, but life expectancy, and even more starkly, in healthy life expectancy. A basic income can be a much more efficient and modern way of addressing the problems that Scotland faces today.
Ryan Shorthouse, much more efficient way of dealing with these problems?
Listen, I think we should keep an open mind about the evidence that emerges from the pilots in Scotland and elsewhere in the world, but I think the theoretical case for a universal basic income is unsound. The welfare system at the moment is complex because people have differing needs. They have childcare, disability, higher housing costs, and as such people get different awards. Now, to make sure those people who are most vulnerable, who have the highest costs, are compensated, the universal basic income would have to be very high, and that would have to be then distributed to everybody. That means that it would be frighteningly expensive. So I'm against that for 3 reasons. 1, it's just fiscally unsustainable. 2, it would mean redirecting resources away from people who really need it to people who don't really need it. People on much higher incomes would be receiving this. And thirdly, what it does, because it would be high, it would mean that people may not be incentivised to work. And I think work is something which is both a private and public good. It's good for the individuals, it's good for their income and their health, but it's also good for wider society. So I don't think there is a sound public policy case for introducing universal basic income. I think it's a waste of time.
Ben, a number of points there, but what about the cost? What figure would you be thinking of a universal income?
That's something that we need to discuss together as a society. You mentioned several good points. I would argue that we already pay for one, but we waste our money paying for the consequences of poverty rather than treating the cause. In terms of making sure those who are most vulnerable receive an appropriate level of support, I believe that a basic income should be set in such a way that at your lowest possible ebb, you are not in a state whereby you can't afford to live in a way that is dignified.
But do you have a ballpark figure for that?
I personally hold some private views, but I believe that at this point we need to win the argument that it's the right thing to do, and then together we can discuss how to afford it. We've demonstrated plenty of times in the past.
Do you think that it would be more expensive than the current benefit system?
No, I don't. I don't at all. I think it would be a pump primer to massively save money on the results of inequality. I think you see a massive decrease in the money spent on the health service because, for example, in the worst areas of Glasgow, people fall into poor health at 48 until the end of their life. So that's 22 years of chronic illness. If you can reduce the deprivation, you could massively reduce the cost in the health service that way. You reduce the cost of crime, and you enable people to enter the workforce that are currently trapped, facing benefit reduction rates equivalent to income tax that's sometimes as high as 96%, according to the government's own figures. I mean, the welfare state's set up with good intentions, but it doesn't achieve its objectives. A basic income, people will pay for it in the same way that they pay for things like the NHS. When you see the benefit, it's worth funding. When
you see the benefit, it's worth funding, Ryan?
Well, we don't know how much, what the figure they want, the campaigners want. But as I said, to compensate for people who are in real need, have high housing costs, who maybe have lots of children, maybe have disability, the cost of their benefits, the cost of their universal basic income award is going to be very high. And then that has to be distributed across the whole of the population.
OK, taking that point though, Ryan, does the current system work though? I mean, Ben pointed out earlier on poverty, food banks, etc. Do you think the current system is working?
No, I think the current system could do with much more reform. I, for one, for example, would give higher amounts to people with longer work histories because, you know, when people get angry with the welfare system, and the welfare system is quite unpopular across the UK, and I think that's a shame. I think welfare is a very important part of a modern capitalist system. But the reason why they say that is because they feel, you know, I've been working all my life and then I get the same as somebody maybe who's lived here only very shortly or who's only been working a couple of years. So I think how you improve attitudes to the welfare system is by making a more contributory-based welfare. So you reward people who have worked longer and you give them more support. And I think that's a way of revitalising attitudes towards welfare.
Yeah, great, fantastic points. I believe that housing benefit and disability benefit would have to remain because housing benefit is already broken, but you could annihilate so many other forms of means testing. In terms of preferential treatment to the rich, I think that basic income wouldn't be ring-fenced from income tax. It would be a common good, such as the police force or the NHS. To suggest that contributions should play some factor in what you receive is tantamount to saying that you should get a fast lane at A&E or have a hotline for the police inaccessible to people on lowest income. But
one problem that you're likely to face, and I think it's fair to say it, is a lot of people will say to you, but you're giving money to people for literally doing nothing.
We already do that with national insurance contributions. If you're providing unpaid care work or you're ill, you're unemployed, you make contributions to your national insurance that way. The estimated value of unpaid care work in Scotland is 10.8 billion. That vastly is performed by women in the home who have no means of supporting themselves. We see dependent relationships where people are trapped in financial dependency. In Scotland, we see 50,000 reports of domestic abuse a year. I think that's a very strong indicator that people would like to leave their situations but cannot, and I think that financial dependency is a key part of that.
OK. And just finally, Ryan, you touched on it earlier on. You're not resistant to the idea of the pilots, at least?
No, I mean, I'm open-minded. There may be some positives, and I think we should be genuinely open-minded to this. But the idea that the universal basic income is going to solve all of these problems, from domestic abuse to entrenched poverty, I think is utopian nonsense. You know, the welfare system does need improving, but universal basic income isn't the way forward. It will be a waste of money.
OK, Ryan Shorthouse, and on that point, Dr. Ben Simmons, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it. But thank you both for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.